let's kind of shift back to investing. You got a married couple, and they have $12,000 sitting in their checking account for a Roth IRA on January 1st. Do you lump sum invest that $12,000, $6,000 each, or do you spread it out $500 each month?
Hands down, if you're me, you lump sum it.
Okay.
And
why is that?
I was hoping you'd ask. So here, assuming now, first of all, we're assuming that when you're putting it into your Roth IRA, you're investing in stocks. That's the investment we're talking about, and that you're investing in VTSAX. And if it's an IRA, there's no reason because you can choose any fund at that point. You're not limited to the choices of an employer plan. So there's no reason not to go into VTSAX. So let's say that's what you're doing. The key thing to understand is the stock market goes up much more often than it goes down, right? In fact, it goes up about 3 years out of 4. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't go up 3 years and then drop 4 and then go up 3 years. That would be nice and predictable, but that's not the way the world works. But on average, it goes up 3 times as often as it goes down. So when you put your lump sum in, you are basically making a bet that you have a 75% chance of winning, which is that every month from there on, the market will go up and go up and go up over the course of the year, and it will be up by the end of the year. There's a 25% chance you'll be wrong. And if it happens to be that year, you would have been better off dollar cost averaging. But you've got to play the odds, it seems to me. And if I have a choice of making a choice that I've got a 75% chance of winning versus 25%, it seems to be a pretty obvious choice. The only time dollar cost averaging works is if the stock stays flat, and that doesn't help you. It trades within a very narrow range, or in this case, the fund, or if it goes down. And as we've said, that's very unlikely. Now, the reason that dollar cost averaging is so appealing to people is they have the very reasonable fear of what happens if I put that money in my Roth all at once, and then tomorrow's the day that the market plunges 40%. And the market is a very volatile beast. It is possible that it could plunge 40% the next day. It's unlikely that it'll be that particular day, but the market does plunge by 40% on a fairly not frequent basis, but on a regular basis. That's just part of the process. And I can understand that fear, but the way to look at it is you say, well, let's suppose you took that money and you dollar cost averaged it in equal parts over the course of the year. And let's suppose the market stayed flat, basically, so it didn't hurt you to do that, didn't help you particularly, didn't hurt you. And in December, you make the very last of those payments. And then the next day, that's when it plunges 40%. So by dollar cost averaging, you haven't eliminated that risk. You've eliminated it for that immediate day, but the moment you've made that last payment, you're at risk. In fact, another way to think about that is every moment of every day that you're invested, you're running the risk that the next day is going to be when it drops 40%. And this gets on into a whole nother topic we might want to talk about, which is volatility and why that really doesn't matter long term. And the short answer to that is because while it drops 40%, as well, it dropped last spring, just about this time, actually, last year. With COVID, it dropped, I think, 32% within a week or something, as a great example of what I'm talking about. But of course, it came back, and the market always comes back, and it always marches on to greater heights, which is why two things to think about market drops. One is they're part of the process. They're common. They're not unusual. It's not the end of the world like the media will be telling you at the time. And it's just something you have to live with. You can't predict it. So you just keep going and you just keep investing. And by the way, last thing on dollar cost averaging, obviously, if you are building your investments out of your earned income and you're putting aside part of your monthly monthly income into your investing, by definition, now you are also dollar cost averaging, but you don't really have an option then. You can only invest money that you have, right? So in that case, I'm in favor of dollar cost averaging, but the way you presented it, which is the correct way, is what if you have a lump sum? Because that's the only time you actually have a decision to make.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. So last year, my wife and I, we had our money tied up in investment property in the flip. So when the market tanked, I was like, man, I need the money so I can max it out. Like I was excited because I figured I can get way more shares. So then we end up selling the investment property and then we put some money into it, but the chatter was that it would drop some more. So I waited to put the rest into our Roth IRAs. It didn't drop, it went up. So I got less shares than I would have gotten if I just put everything in at once. So that kind of goes along with what you just said.
You know, it's interesting because last spring, I am a big proponent, if anybody's aware of my work or if they, after listening to us today, they turn to it and they read it. I am a big proponent that market drops don't matter. They're always temporary. Until the United States of America disappears or until civilization ends, the market will always recover, right? Because if it were not to recover from a collapse of for whatever reason, then by definition, the country is at an end. So I have a great confidence in that. With COVID last year, I had a lot of people telling me, Jim, I understand what you've said. I agree with you, but this time it's different because this time it's a pandemic. Well, it's always something different. I mean, the market crashes on a fairly regular basis. It drops more than crashes too, of course, on a even more regular basis. And there's always something that triggers it, and it's always something we don't expect, and it's always different. So what I was telling people at the time is it's not different. I mean, it's different in that it's a pandemic that's triggering it, and that's a different trigger. But the fact it's dropping is not different. The trigger is just different. And this trigger is particularly heinous because, of course, people are dying, and that makes it different. But in terms of how the market's going to perform, it doesn't matter whether it was the overextended housing situation in 2008 or the pandemic in 2020.